So I ended up back on the Bells Mountain Trail again. It's been a while since I've ridden this trail, and I figured it's time to revisit it. But more importantly, since the last time I reviewed this trail, they've built a whole new trail that actually leads all the way to the top of Bells Mountain, and that's an important new trail called Fern Way. With the addition of Fern Way, the lollipop ends up being about 14.5 miles with around 2,600 feet of elevation gain, depending on how you want to calculate it. The best place to start this ride is at the Cold Creek Day Use area, because that way you can cut out part of an unpleasant climb getting out of this canyon at the end of the ride. I ended up here on Memorial Day because the parking lot at the bottom of 6th Sense in Cold Creek was full, so I just kept driving because I wasn't feeling very social this day. And I just wanted to ride my bike in the forest. Like, I totally could have found a place to park up here if I'd really wanted to, but I didn't want to. So anyway, the ride starts off pretty nicely traversing through this green forest. When you get to this intersection at the bottom of a very steep hill, pull the stick out of your spokes and turn right. Shortly, you'll end up at this pretty little waterfall where you can contemplate how you should like, subscribe to this channel, and navigate to patreon.com/voiceovertrails and pick a sponsorship level that works for you if you want to continue to support informational content like this. Enjoy the waterfall. After the waterfall, keep riding. You'll meander through some nice forest, cross a little bridge, climb a little hill, and end up in these very, very nice woods, again, adjacent to a clear-cut tree farm. At this point, the trail becomes kind of mostly downhill for the next couple of miles. You'll lose 382 feet and gain 200 feet in the first 2 miles. This is a cross-country ride, not an enduro wizard hat. This is also where the Bells Mountain Trail is mostly a Creekside trail traversing through thick riparian forest with the sights, sounds, and smells you'd expect from a thick riparian forest. It's quite a nice departure from the environments you'll encounter farther up the slopes, and it sure is nice that they were able to route the trail down here in the first place. The only possible downside is that routing the trail through here happened almost 20 years ago, and that process required building a lot of bridges. Those bridges are now deteriorating as they approach the end of their service life. It's imperative to watch out for hikers on this trail, by the way, because this is a hiker-focused trail. And in fact, the Washington Trails Alliance, as well as the Chinook Trails Association and the Trail Runners group up here all do a lot of work to keep this trail in good shape. The trail drops about 900 feet elevation after around 350 feet of ascent within the first mile or so don't expect a kamikaze bomber of a descent out of this. I already told you Bells Mountain is a cross-country ride on a primarily hiking trail. That's what it does. Enjoy all the descending you get on the way into this, though, because it feels like the climbing never ends on the way back out of here. But I love this section in here. It's just such a delightful little Creekside trail, like I said, and most of the clear cuts that are actually really nearby, they hardly even seem evident. They left kind of enough buffer of trees that you got to look to see that you're like in one tiny little strip of trees. But do remember to put yourself in the mindset, since this is a lollipop after all, that you're not, in fact, almost done when you come back to this place. For crying out loud, though, when this trail is good, it's really good. It's magnificent, spectacular. Just as I pulled away from the creek, I noticed this new reroute that WTA has been working on. I couldn't be happier about this reroute. It's a sorely needed fix for a terrible section of this trail that was way too steep, always got slippery, and was turning into a giant trench. Washington Trails Association has done a really good job on this reroute, and it's commendable. I like it. It's a much more pleasant way to deal with this grade. When I first started riding this trail about 10 years ago, I thought of this section as a clear cut, and indeed it was a clear cut back then, complete with views out to Silver Star and Larch Mountain. It is no longer a clear cut, as the trees have grown in a lot in the last 10 years, as trees do. The top of this section is also the point at which the first place, about 2.6 miles into this ride, where you're climbing and descending equal each other at around 450 feet. It's also a pretty steep little hill. That's the one thing that can make Bells Mountain a bit of a chore sometimes. Every single climb on this trail is a kick in the gut. It's punchy. But this trail has something really important going for it, and that's that in a normal year, it stays snow-free most of the winter, and in a particularly warm year, it can remain completely snow-free all year. When we're not having weird topsy-turvy La Nina winters like the last 2 years where we got low elevation snow in the middle of April, this is a fantastic fantastic escape from the high elevation white stuff when you just want to get out and ride, or if you're a skier who only likes good conditions, it's perfect for that shoulder season. When you get to this road intersection, turn right to go down the hill farther than you'd think you would need to go down the hill to reconnect with the trail over here on the right. In a few years, this won't make any sense because that section of road will just look like a trail again. This is a really fun little undulating section of the trail. Honestly, when the trail isn't overgrown, it's just such a perfect little gem. At mile 3.9, the ascent and descent will once again equal each other at around 675 feet. So when you get to this point on the way back, you technically have another 675 feet of climbing before you get back to the parking lot. It doesn't actually exactly work out that way. I haven't ever figured out why. This section right here is my favorite section of this trail for no reason at all. There's no reason it's my favorite. It just is. It's just a random section of the trail that goes through a clear cut, but I had a little moment of transcendence here, like, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, and I've just loved this little patch of the trail ever since. Right after this patch of openness, the trail descends to this little bridge, and from here, it's nothing but insane climbing madness for the rest of the ride until you come back. I've noticed when I edit videos that my head is almost always tilted to the right. Like, when I made a video of myself riding in Chicago on a paved bike path, I had to crop the video and rotate it because my head tilt was so distracting. I wonder if everyone tilts their head to one side when they're riding their bike. I don't know, but I sure do. I wouldn't have realized that, by the way, if I wasn't watching so much video of my own bike rides. I ran over a snake up here. I hate running over snakes. It slithered away, so hopefully the little sneck is okay. Garter snakes are like the cutest of the snakes. That's why I hate running over them. Unfortunately, they also like to hang out on the trail because it's warm and sunny. This hill is the steepest hill on Bell's Mountain, by the way. I almost always end up needing to walk the bike somewhere on this hill, either because I'm trying to save my legs or because I can't find enough traction to complete the climb. There's no shame in walking this. It's a long trip back to the car when you're done. This clear cut wasn't here the last time I rode this, but that's the nature of riding a trail built through working forest. Now, you can see clear cuts as unsightly, but one thing they're awesome for is opening up new territorial views to stuff you hadn't seen before, and to be honest, as soon as they've cut the trees down, I forget what the place even looked like before they cut the trees down. Like, sure, I'm against harvesting any more like really old trees because they're not making more of those, but I've gotten so used to the constant change in these tree farms throughout here that I hardly even notice anymore. As long as the trail is here and I get to be outside, it's all fine with me. Besides, my house is made out of wood. So's yours. Okay, as you climb up through the last clear cut, you'll approach this, the first intersection with Fern Way. Don't take this turn. There's a much funner way to do this. So when you see this intersection, keep going to the right. I also remember riding through this section of forest again 9 or 10 years ago, right after it was harvested, and I remember there being views here. Now it just looks like young forest and the expansive views are all gone. Always keep in mind that whatever you think the forest looks like when you discovered it, it was way different to somebody 10 years ago when they discovered it. There's actually a significant amount of descending here between the exit and the entrance to Fern Way. That's why you need to do this the way I tell you to do this. This unmarked intersection is the entrance to Fern Way. Continue up the old road grade until you see the actual sign that marks that entrance on the right. It's hard to say. It doesn't make any sense, but here you go. Fern Way was built as part of a grant project that added around 17 miles of new multi-user trail to the Yakult-Burn State Forest over about the last 5 to 7 years. This trail is a lovely little loop that fixes an old problem with the Bells Mountain Trail, and that's that there wasn't a trail to the summit. I mean, the Bells Mountain Trail itself just skirts off 600 feet below the summit. So Sword Fern takes you up to the summit of Bells Mountain and then back down. The forest it climbs through here is just plain old delightful. The trail is pretty steep, around 10 to 14% grade or so. It's a bit uncomfortable on the bike, but completely within reason for the hiker-focused trail that this is. You're not on this ride for a shred-tastic gnar-fest anyway, so don't get your priorities misaligned. This trail is what it is. Enjoy it for what it is. All the road crossings on this trail are pretty straightforward, so that's nice. The reason I told you to ride Sword Fern counterclockwise like this, as you will if you start on the second entrance, is that you get all the climbing out of the way first. You'll get to do enough climbing on the way back to the car anyway, so don't worry too much about it. The trail finds this gorgeous and unique, for the Pacific Northwest, deciduous forest. It's all alders and vine maples in here and very few conifers, and that's kind of neat and really unusual. There's a lot of very intentional cribbing on this trail, including this built-up outside turn and some reinforcement done with rocks and more wood farther up the grade. And then it becomes obvious why. It's for the same reason there's all this deciduous forest, is this entire section is clearly actually an active landslide, and then the trail is just kind of slumping down the hill with all the other material. For the most part, the main feature you're going to note while riding this trail is that there are a lot of switchbacks. So the trail switchbacks up the hill, gaining 650 feet over about 1.3 miles until it arrives here, where there's a little moto trail leading up to a gravel road. This is the summit of Bell's Mountain. Try not to be too amazed. Kilo Delta 7, Quebec Oscar Whiskey, CQ Soda.
Kilo 7, Alpha Golf Lima.
Kilo 7, Alpha Golf Lima, QSL.
QSL, hey, good to talk to you again. Thanks for chasing me yesterday on 17 meters.
Now, right here is where I'm about to do something incredibly nerdy. If you didn't think I was an insufferable nerd before, you're going to think so now. I've had a ham radio license for about 20 years, and I recently got back into it because there is this activity called Summits on the Air, where you bring your radio with you to the summit of a mountain and activate. Yes, that is the verb we use. You activate the summit by making contacts with other ham radio people who are chasing you. So I just happened to have my handheld radio with me on this ride, so of course I had to activate this summit because I could. I mean, the people I was making contacts with were like, they're like, 10 or 15, 20, some of them 30 miles away. I mean, that's kind of cool, right? Walkie-talkie that works over. You don't think this is cool. That's all right. If you're curious about this, navigate to my other channel and check it out. Just for reference, from the Cold Creek Day Use Area parking lot, you will have logged 2,061 feet of climbing to get to the summit of Bell's Mountain. By the time I got back to the car on this ride, the GPS showed 2,600 feet of climbing overall, but altogether you're going to get 1,800 feet of descent on the way back down. And my overall impression of Fern Way is that I love it. It's a total game changer because now there's a decent and fun route to the summit of Bell's Mountain that doesn't require an ungodly and punishing road climb. This descent, by the way, is a lot of fun, especially for a hiking trail. The only small complaint I have is that some of the local hooligans have been poaching it on their dirt bikes, and if they keep doing that, they're going to destroy all the work that went into building this. But anyhow, the sight lines are really good on this, so you can see hikers as you approach. The grade and turns are such that you don't pick up too much speed, but you do have something to catch you where you need to be caught. But for a hiker-focused trail, this one sure does flow nicely on a bike. I really genuinely had a fun time descending this, even after 2,000 feet of cross-country trail climbing in order to get up here. Eventually, after 600 feet of flowy good descent, the trail ends here, back at the intersection with the Bell's Mountain Trail. Already talked a lot about Bell's Mountain, but the last thing I'll mention about Bell's Mountain is that this initial descent back down to the bridge, while painful on the way up, adds up to a really fun way to begin the return trip to the car. Combined with Sword Fern, it's 1,252 feet of super fun descent. Just keep in mind that when you get to the bottom of this descent, you've still got about another hour of work ahead of you before you get back to the parking lot. I'd like to take this moment to thank all of my Patreon supporters, especially my Loamy Goodness level sponsors Andy Suery, Brad Goodson, and Charles Kim. I'd also like to thank my Hero Dirt level sponsors, earning their special mention at the end of this video: Bryce Ulrich, Devin Young, Edward Lanton, and Pedro Cantorini. If you'd like to join this list of supporters of the fine art of making recreational content, navigate to patreon.com/voiceovertrails and find a sponsorship level that feels right to you. Now, get out there and go ride your bike.